It's a pleasure to be here. I've been to your campus a few times, and I've watched it closely, and I really admire all the progress that has been made here, and the incredible way in which the institution is carrying itself for greater heights and greater accomplishments. So I, as mentioned here before, have been in educational track in higher education for a very long time. And my PhD work, though, it's in the field of diversity management in Christian higher education. And so I study student satisfaction modules and try to figure out how institutions should continue to change or improve itself so that students can continue to be empowered to be all that they could be. And my last engagement was in Campbellsville University, but I traveled throughout the world with many institutions. So I've decided that I have a lot more other projects that I needed to undertake. So at this time, I work as a quantum education network as a way to do professional development in many, many institutions throughout the world. So in traveling abroad, whether it's Nigeria, Vietnam, China, or Australia, or UK, or places like that, people are the same. Cultures may be a little different, but people are the same. And some of the theories are transferable, but contextually we have to manage, because contextualization is the essence of it all. If we don't do good contextualization, then all of the theories are meaningless. And therefore we try to do theory and practice in the form of praxis to be able to improve ourselves step by step. Recently, I did some professional development in Guwahati, Assam, in Montessori schools with the teachers who needed to understand key reading laboratory interventions for people who have difficulty with reading. My reason for being here is to create a pathway for U.S. students who may be thinking outside the box. And as we know, in cultural anthropology, we have learned that our society has grown from being a foraging society into an agrarian society, into an industrialized society, into a globalized society. What does that mean for you here? Now we are entering into, in certain cases, dystopian society. And when we enter into this form, what does organizations look like? What do leadership look like? And that's a question to ask is, you are here in this moment in time, but clearly you are part of the global community because of the technologies that have brought the world to your doorsteps. You're thinking like the world person, even though you're physically here. And therefore, you are able to step out of your norms to travel in the mind into places that you have never been before. And that is to say that, yes, you are a globalized citizen. And yes, you have been exposed to dystopian methods and living communities and so on. Having said that, I would say that there are new elements in education that's emerging. And I think national education policy have recognized it. And now they are wanting institutions to engage in it. So let's say the idea of online learning is a necessity now in institutions. I've been dealing with online for the last 10 years. I've taught on online platform for the last 8 years. One particular institution had 100,000 students online, out of which I had to teach about 5 different subject matters at a given time. But the way it has been organized in very pristine form so that it can be purely online or it could be a hybrid online. And it was mainly for adult education, for adult students, but that is changing. Most institutions are now using online platforms to supplement and to parallel their traditional face-to-face education as well. So that is going on. Online learning platforms and how students can engage in online platforms and earn degrees from anywhere throughout the world. Education is not cheap, it is expensive, but for those of you who wish to travel further on in your educational career, but are a little short on money, educational online platform may be a solution for you. And on the third day, we'll talk about studying abroad and what does it take to study abroad, whether it's in the United States or England or Europe or any other Asian countries or even Australia. So I have traveled to these regions and therefore I understand their footprints and how they go about with the application process. As dean, then my responsibility was primarily to oversee immigration DSOs in our campus. DSOs are designated school officials who have to be certified to handle immigration details for the U.S. government. So Peter Northouse is a well-known theoretician and a practitioner in West Kansas University, and he wrote a book called Leadership, and it's a pretty detailed book, and I don't expect you to read it overnight, but it'll take you some time to digest it. There are many theories that he has assembled and given to us, but we can only digest a few, so I'm going to go with some that are quite commonly used in different industry at this stage. So having said that, let me give you some introduction to leadership. So the overview here, importance of leadership, how we define leadership, and how we describe leadership. And we'll look at some of these things because in our minds, we have seen models of leadership in so many sectors of society, whether it's in the church, whether it's in the industry, whether it's in the governmental context, whether it's in the educational context. So there are different kinds of leadership application, and sometimes we think that we know that these principles are at play. In some cases they are, but we begin to see what are the healthy forms and what are the dysfunctional forms, so that we embrace the healthy forms and say, that's the style that I really can identify with and I want to run with. And so over the years, as I studied these, I incorporated certain things in my own life so that it was transformational for me. And so having said that, we want to look into what leadership is all about. But leadership as a definition has evolved over the years. In the 1900s, it has to do with the control and centralization of power. But then in the 30s, people begin to identify traits in leadership. And we still see some of traits leadership today. And I think in less industrialized societies, traits become very important. But more and more and increasingly in globalized society, they are looking for traits as well because we have, a pendulum keeps swinging. Then we have the group approach where team has taken place. And oftentimes team has lots of leverage because they have pooled together their resources, their skill sets, and their knowledge base, and they're able to together function as a very powerful force. And therefore group dynamics have become a big part. Then you have group theory, shared goals, and effectiveness. In the 60s, we began to see leadership as behavior, because behavior can be managed, behavior can be nurtured, behavior can be changed. So if such behavior is changed, then we can also, to a certain degree of accuracy, see certain leadership qualities emerging. Then we have what we call organizational behavior. When boomers begin to take over organizations and build corporate industry and corporate world, they begin to have the need for organizing the different departments into manageable wholes. And when they did that, they began their theories of organizational management. And they begin to see that in certain organizations, things are a little bit better than other organizations. So when you think about Apple, let's say, Apple has got a pristine product, but that's because they have an organizational culture intended to produce certain organizational product, and therefore there's a regimen from step 1 to step Z, all the way in between. But you will not see the same kind of values embodied in another non-Apple type of an organization. Maybe because they have a different philosophy, they have a different approach. So in terms of organizational behavior and how we need to understand the behavior to be able to move forward is clearly a necessity in leadership. I will also interject to this idea that our educational teaching learning process has always been delivery face-to-face, either by an expert or by a facilitator, or it's a shared discovery journey between the teacher and the student. But now we are including and thrusting in the virtual community as part of the educational process as well. So when we do that, how does one behave within a virtual community? It's very different than functioning in a non-virtual community. It has its own culture. It has its own symbols. It has its own language. Forms of communication that are varied. You have the crossover, and therefore we call it cross-cultural communication when you navigate both worlds. And so organizational behavior has become a very key matter. Then in the 80s, we have the explosion of research that had happened, during which time new leadership theories have emerged. The leader's will has become very notable because a leader who is highly established is able to singularly change and influence people, or the influence of the leader, or the traits of the leader and the transformation of the leader. So these are things that are going on in the world platform. And I know that here, even in Nagaland, you see bits and pieces of this operating. And so it's not new to you. I just wanted to consolidate it all to say that these are all aspects of leadership and its definition. In the 21st century, then, we have the process of leadership. To get there, there is a process. You have to earn trust. You have to negotiate. Being educated is of no consequence. Networking has become a very key aspect of leadership. If you don't have your networking ability, then your resources are limited. There is also such a thing as, like I said earlier, CQ. Having intelligence is not sufficient anymore. You have to have your emotional quotient also well accepted within your spheres. But on top of that, you have to be also culturally cognizant and culturally competent. And that has to do with CQ. In Harvard Business Review, they had interviewed 600 some CEOs. And of the 600 CEOs, 90% of them said when they have candidates that come to their door to be hired, 90% of them said they will hire one who has a very high levels of CQ compared to the IQ and EQ, which is interesting because they find out that the idea of working in teams in management has become an asset rather than a liability. For people who do not have that kind of strength, then it becomes a liability to an industry or organization. So some definitions view leadership as the focus of group process or a personality perspective. So think about that. Is it a process? Is it a personality? There are arguments for each one of this. Or is it an act of behavior? Is it the power relationship between leaders and followers? When you think deep about it, these things are at play. Also, in the leaders that I am sure you are thinking of. Of course, in Nagaland, when we think about leaders, sometimes we think mainly about political leaders. But we do have church leaders as well. And then we also have institutional leaders. We have to think about in terms of those people. A transformational process, a skills perspective. So all of these are elements that Peter Northouse talks about. But in the interest of time, we cannot deal with all of the above, but I can sort of share a few things and perhaps those of you who are engaging in this field, you can go deeper in these things in the future. Leadership then is a process whereby an individual influences a group of individuals to achieve a common goal. So in this sense, then it is a process. And if a person has this kind of an individual influence capability, then how amazing is that? And just because someone has a certificate doesn't mean a thing. In India, we are very much about certificates. So when I teach these professional development with these teachers, they always ask me at the end of the training, will I get a certificate? And I told them, you know, the National Education Policy 2019 did a study on 30,000 teachers, and they had discovered that these certificate-wielding teachers are of no value because they aren't able to deliver what they're supposed to. And therefore, government is requiring institutions to do away with just certificates. So for the school teachers then, they have to earn their bachelor's in education. Back in the day, it wasn't so. You can have just a certificate and that was good enough. But now, by 2025, all of the teachers in the public school system have to have a 4-year bachelor's of education. Nowadays, we have 2-year Bachelor of Education degrees. In America, we call them associate degrees. Now, you're having to have those things be transformed into a 4-year Bachelor's of Education. What this means for certificate people is that it may not be sufficient for them to be functioning in institutions that are highly research-oriented and driven by research. So having said that, the process whereby an individual influences groups of individuals to achieve a common goal is leadership. So there are two kinds in that. The component central to the phenomenon of leadership is that it's a process. It involves influence. It occurs within a group context, and it also attends to common goals, a group context. So when we move from one group to another group to another group, we need to be students of context, and we have to be students of adaptation. I've known people who struggle at adapting into new environments because they are solely locked into a certain kind of way of life. So leadership is about learning and functioning within a context. Leaders and followers are involved together. So that synergy is very important, that a leader cannot be a leader if he or she does not have followers following. It would look odd, wouldn't it? A leader is walking along and there's nobody coming along. Oh, there goes our leader. It looks kind of funny. And followers need each other and often initiate and maintain the relationship. So in a certain kind of a context where leaders have arisen to a certain level, they are worshipped as Messiah. And as they are worshipped as Messiah, their emotional quotient is so elevated beyond what you know, such that they feel like they are God's answer to mankind, and therefore they could do no wrong. And therefore, followers aren't always viewed as having the potential of being an asset to this whole dynamic. And so this kind of leadership then requires the followers to also buy in. You cannot coercively do this, which in some cases, coercion has been used in leadership. And they're not above or better than followers. But how do we get there? How do we get there? It's never easy. And therefore, process is a big part of leadership.
So how do you see compromise in terms of this situation?
I think institutional goals are very key in this matter.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes, I think institutional goals are important. If it contributes to institutional goal, then by all means, you have the upper hand.
Yeah.
But if not, and it's not contributing institutional goals, then clearly it is a non-factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think that's why along the way you're always evaluating to see, where are the dysfunctions, and where are the steroids that are, interjecting into this whole piece. And positions that are pretty much settled in, and that's why I think with HODs, there's always an openness that needs to be, where your position is not threatened, but I think more so is there continuing education going on, self-improvement going on, so that you always have to be one step ahead or two steps ahead of the game, so that anyone brings anything up, wow, you have openness to that discussion, so that it's not left to the other people to be festering about. But institutional goals are very important. Assigned versus emergent leadership. Here in the assigned leadership based on occupying a position within an organization. So the team leaders are assigned leaders. The plant managers are assigned. The HODs are assigned. The department heads are assigned. The directors are assigned. So this kind of assigned leadership is a form of leadership. They have outcomes and they have goals that they have to accomplish. Percentages of products that need to be either sold in a marketing world or different kinds of return on investment that need to be done. So in terms of the assigned leadership, some leaders are functioning very well within this context, but they have to emerge to the place where they can be the CEOs, chief executives. And so you allow time and process to bring them about to that level. An individual then perceived by others as the most influential member of a group or organization regardless of the individual's title. And there are such people within institutions and within organizations that have most influential qualities that you see are able to influence change. And so emergence over time through communication behaviors, verbal involvement, being informed, seeking others' opinions, being firm but not rigid, affected by personality and gender. So emerging leaders in this sense are just naturally evident. And when you see these people, they exude confidence, and they also then are able to call it like it is, not afraid of the consequences, because they have timed it well and they have summed up a situation well, and they're able to make the decisions necessary. Okay? Then you have position power. It's derived from office or rank in an organization. So your elders, the department chair has the highest form of power within that department. They are the ones that make the decision on behalf of the department. But of course, he is always or she's always taking and monitoring feedback from the various constituents who are within the department. But in the end, he's got to live and die by the decision that he or she makes. And usually has a large rationale for the decision that he or she has made. And usually they're very accurate about it. They will not make a judgment that is going to be brash. So, I think that's why we call it positional power. They have arrived there because they have earned the right to be there. And they have been through different settings to be able to get there. Then you have personal power is influence derived from being seen as likable and knowledgeable. So the likability factor is a big deal because you're always breaking ice and always trying to come across as trustworthy, always trying to come across as a moral bastion or as a purveyor of pristine knowledge. So personal likability and knowledgeableness is all part of that. And if those areas are not strong, then in the end, it could be problematic for you. Even if you have a positional power and you don't have personal power associated with it, then sometimes your positional power can be very hollow. But on the other hand, you have personal power, but you may not have positional power. And that too can be equally dangerous. Often when there's a conflict, you are having to decide between personal power or positional power. And you make your choices accordingly. So positional power has to do with legitimate, reward, coercive, informational power. Personal power has to do with referent and expert power. There is shift in leadership powers over the years as study has ensued. And so power is no longer driven the domain of the leaders, because as the world continues to change, there are always alternate ways of thinking. And therefore, the leaders don't always have that monopoly anymore. They have to recruit additional partners or workers or followers to validate their position. Followers demand more from leaders now, in the sense that once you have arrived, you feel that you have arrived, so you can put your feet up on your desk and drink your coffee and unleash all of your minions to come and serve you. That is not the case anymore. You get your job right, you do your job right, and you demonstrate a life of model and great admiration, and then your followers will follow along. But there is such a thing as those who feel like when they have arrived, then they are the messiahs of their kingdom. Then there is access to technology. It has empowered followers. So if you are information-based leader, then your expert knowledge may not necessarily be the only knowledge that's out there. There will be those who have a different kind of information that's as good as yours or even better. So you better know your stuff. And therefore, then you have to recruit the help of those who have equal kind of information, so that you work together collaboratively to move forward. It is not an undercutting of your position, but it is more the strengthening of your position to do that. Some people may want to use information against you, but if you maintain your personal powers and if you maintain your morality and you maintain your integrity, you will have the people behind your back helping you out, because there will always be those who wants to get ahead of you. Then they have the need for leaders to be more transparent. And in American system now, the biggest authority is shifting towards the judicial system, not towards the legislative system or the executive system, but the judicial system. Why? Is because in this co-equal kind of a government, there is no resolution in the executive leadership platform. The president is being challenged every day, and therefore the president doesn't have the apex of information anymore, even though he's got his CIA, his FBI, and his national security at his fingertips. He no longer can say that, because the legislative body is now coming together and formulating a force to combat against the executive wing. So the arbiter in all of this is the judicial system, the Supreme Court. That's why Trump was very astute in appointing conservative judges onto the Supreme Court, because the conservative judges tended to uphold his policies very well. So if there were arguments about the border, or arguments about abortion, or arguments about this, that, and the other thing, and they took it up all the way to the Supreme Court, the likelihood is there that Trump would win, because his first notion was to appoint Neil Gorsuch and Kavanaugh. Those are both very conservative judges. Okay, so the coercive involves the use of force to effect change, influence others to do something by manipulating rewards and penalties in the work environment, or the use of threats, punishments, and negative rewards. So we can say the examples are Adolf Hitler, Jim Jones, and Taliban leaders, but there are plenty who don't fall into that category that we see every day in our neighborhoods that are following this coercive method. And so I want us to be aware of their qualities. Anything that is for one person's gain to the detriment of the whole can be problematic. You always have to move together as a community. It is not for one person to have to always be the one that earns all of the credit or have to, run with it by himself or herself. But it's a togetherness journey by moving forward. Then, of course, power and restraint used to force followers to engage in extreme behavior. And that's true of Taliban leaders. Leadership and management, according to Cotter, is that management activities include procedures, orders, and consistency. There's planning and budgeting, there's organizing and staffing, controlling, and problem solving. But on the other hand, leadership activities in this context, it produces change and movement. It establishes direction, aligns people, motivates and inspires people to accomplish these tasks. So a manager is very different from a leader. Sometimes we think that they are one and the same, but it is not. A leader is one that's always motivating and always ahead of the game, trying to get them to function at deeper levels and aspire to higher goals. A manager is always dealing with making sure that the pieces and parts of the puzzle are all functioning to move forward. And so, but in leadership and management, they cannot be separated. They're always together. So you have to think of it in those terms in your context. Then you have managers and leaders. There are unidirectional and authority managers are, but leaders are multi-directional in influence. Managers are reactive. They prefer to work with people solving. They have low emotional involvement, but the leaders are emotionally active, involved. They shape ideas over responding to them. They act to expand available options. They change the way people think about what is possible. So the leaders are always daring. They're always thinking outside the box, always wanting to move the organization in a direction that's positive for the organization. And that's different than what the manager would be. So here, situational leadership objectives here, we want to see the perspective, the leadership styles, developmental levels, and how does the approach work. Now, incidentally, Paul Hershey and Kenneth Blanchard, two very fine Christians, put this system together. And it's been used in 70,000 different organizations throughout the world, and it's been found to be fairly successful. And I think in your context, it will be successful too if you choose to use this model. So, it focuses on leadership in situations, because not all situations are alike. As earlier, the department head of management indicated that context matters. Situation and its context matters, because those things will allow you to exert your leadership in a certain way. It emphasizes adapting your style in different situations, and it demands different kinds of leadership. So one style doesn't fit all. You have to exert yourself in different ways. And then you use extensively this model in organizational leadership, training, and also in development. So when you're doing evaluation of an organization, you are using this model to evaluate your department or your organizations, because it's helpful too. The definition is it's composed of both a directive dimension where the leader is highly directive. So as was stated earlier, in a coercive kind of leadership, the leader is always directive. A director is always directing. But what these people are saying is that there is also a supportive dimension. The leader as a supporter. The leader not always as a director. So these two things are very important. Each dimension must be applied appropriately in a given situation. The leader evaluates employees to assess their competence and commitment to perform a given task. Sometimes competence is a problem. So you have to identify that. This is a competence problem. Sometimes it is a commitment problem. Motivation, passion, energy levels. If this is the case, then you as a leader must call out on that commitment issue to say that on the basis of this commitment needs to improve, or else our organization is not going to be moving forward. So it is a combination of commitment and also of competence. Leaders evaluate these things all the time in an organization. The dimensions then we have to understand. Directive behaviors help group members in goal achievement through one-way communication, through giving directions, establishing goals and how to achieve them, the methods of evaluation and timelines and so on. They define their roles. So in the directional model, in this behavior, the leader as a director provides a direction specifically to people who are in this mode. Here we have the model in this way, where the lower grids from here to here has to do with the directional direction. From here to here we have the support direction. So as a leader, you're either a director, a coach, a supporter, or a delegator, depending upon situation as well as depending upon the circumstance. And then, of course, you have the developmental level, the degree to which the followers have the competence and commitment necessary to accomplish a given task or activity. So in some ways, you are very good at the subject matter that you are engaging in, but all of a sudden, political science and humanities get pushed into a business administration kind of an environment. Then all of a sudden, it's a whole new set of information that you have to assimilate. So that's what we're saying, is that in situation, you're having to be directed, but at the same time, you have your HODs that are experienced in these matters. So it's a big stretch. You have the incoming freshmen, and then you have the experienced gurus that we have to try and have this interaction with in terms of the content side of things. And so I think this is done all the time in many spheres. So here in this slide, you will see that the follower is sometimes referred to as a D1, 2, 3, and 4, or sometimes R1, 2, 3, and 4, having to do with readiness levels. And oftentimes the readiness level, the coloration, the D1 corresponds to S1, D2 corresponds to S2, and so on. And so you end up being able to, go through your mental database and be able to pull it up. So here's another way to look at it. In order for us to get to a target goal, you're always going back and forth between these categories. Managers are important because organizations need their managerial skills and abilities more than ever in uncertain, complex, and chaotic times. So we need good managers. The downside of managing is they can become too locked into their own world, and they cannot see the bigger picture sometimes. That's the problem. Sometimes that can be a problem. So we have to try to get the managers to think internal, but also external, so that you're not too micromanaged or too internal that you don't have a macro knowledge of what's going on around you. Okay? So of the relationship between employees and the direct supervisors and managers, able to function in traditional and non-traditional environments in the 21st century. So at lunch table, we were talking about traditional forms of education that we are accustomed to, in terms of face-to-face, in terms of goings on. Now we're entering into talking about new forms and alternative forms of education. And you're having then to walk away, not walk away completely, but reach out to new forms of education, non-traditional forms. And that can be quite challenging because it's a new thing. Managers then coordinate work activities to achieve organizational goals. They are coordinators. They have to coordinate appropriately. If they over-coordinate, problem. If they under-coordinate, problem. They have to look at what the institutional goals are and organize and coordinate themselves that way. You only exert what you must in order to accomplish those tasks. If it requires more, then you need to exert those things. Actions are affected by both the internal culture of the organization and the constraints of the external environment, including the global environment. So internally here you have your own culture, but there is a world out there that can Tetsuo continue to survive in its bubble by not interacting with the changes that are happening around them. Probably not very effectively, but if you're interacting it with the external elements that are out there, then you're always calibrating yourself. You're always asking the question, how can we improve? How are we going to make this thing happen? First line managers. So there is first line, there is middle management, and there is top management. And the first line managers at the lowest level manage the work of non-managerial employees directly or indirectly involved with the production or creation of the organization's products. So these are just entering in. There are more trainee, in hand, waiting to take on roles, bigger roles as they move along. I hope I didn't knock anything down, no? So there are such a thing as first line managers, but these are managers on track to make their way all the way to the top. But if they aspire to be way up to the top, they're not ready yet because they require to have certain skills and certain experience to get there. Then the middle managers are managers between the first line level and the top level of the management of the organization who manage the work of first line managers. These people are the most equipped and hard worker bees because they have to cope with the challenges of the top management, but they also have to deal with the challenges of the low management. They have to keep that person in mind, but they also have to keep this person in mind by dragging them up. And this is a tough job, middle managers. Middle managers are the ones that either make or break an organization because they have the capacity or the lack of to make it happen. Then the top managers are managers at the near the top level, responsible for making organization-wide decisions and establishing plans and goals and affecting the entire organization. So if this is a general, the middle managers will be the lieutenants that have to execute it. Efficiency, doing things right, getting most output from the least amount of inputs. Doing things right. So if efficiency then is not always easy because when you have the least amount of inputs, you're scrambling to see how you can put this thing together. And sometimes you feel like your Achilles not being able to move forward because you don't have the resources to get the things done. But a good manager is able to cut excesses and handle with the things that they have available to accomplish a particular goal. So efficiency, doing things right, but then also effectiveness, doing the right things. This is an ethical issue, right? So completing activities so that organization goals are achieved, doing the right things. And these are both complementing each other as the organization moves forward. And the manager is ensuring that. Management functions according to the functions approach. They perform certain activities and duties as they efficiently and effectively coordinate the work of others, okay? So the work of others is always important. That's why situational management. The R and the D1, 2, 3, and 4 corresponds to S1, 2, 3, and 4, right? This morning. So if your workers are not willing and they're not motivated and not able and skilled, then that's a problem you have, okay? So management skills approach by Robert Katz is very interesting because he states that there is such a thing as technical skills that people bring into an organization. Then there is human skills that people bring. And then you have conceptual skills. And these are three things involved within any given organization. And how these three areas are managed is very critical in a department, or in a business, or in a corporate sector. And you're always trying to see where the low managers fit and where the top managers fit. As you can see in this slide, lower manager levels mostly deal with technical details. The middle managers tend to deal with all of the three at a certain level. Then top managers deal mainly with the top conceptual aspect of things, okay? Common characteristics of organization where you have distinct purpose, composed of people, and deliberate structure. It's as simple as you get, okay? So here you see these three things at play in an organization at all times. If one takes over the other, then you have no homeostasis. All of them have to be interacting with one another so that institutional homeostasis or an organizational homeostasis could happen. And the size of organization can be large or small, where in the large organization, it represents only 2% of the organization in Canada or in the United States. Or small businesses represent 98% of all Canadian companies or American companies. So that's why in small business administration, they are the bread and butter of America or Canada. So what happens is that the government, when they have trade wars, they always have to keep the small businesses in mind because they can very easily lose their money as they go along. Okay? Corporate industry can recover very quickly, but small businesses may not. Then you have the changing organization, traditional organizations and new organizations, where in the traditional organization, it tends to be more stable, but inflexible. The job focus, work is defined by job positions. They are individual oriented, permanent jobs, they command oriented, and so on and so forth. This is a characteristic of a traditional organization. Is that good? Is that bad? There's no such thing as good and bad. It's when you put it into a new context, then you will see its value or not, okay? Then in traditional context too, managers make decisions, rule-oriented, homogeneous workforce, 9 to 5, it's hierarchical, typical hours of operation. So it is very traditional. Then you have the new organization. It's dynamic, it's flexible, it's skills focused. Skills focused. So when in a new organizational setting, when new workers come in, they come with a different set of skills. And they are accustomed to those kinds of skills being deployed. And if it's not being visible, then their effectiveness gets compromised. So new skills must, in a way, interact with traditional skills. But new skills can also have its own problems. And by that, I mean that not every skill that is developed and gained in a new setting may not always be appropriate in a traditional context. So adaptation is the key again. How do you adapt such that your skills are redirected to function in an optimal level to help the organization move forward? So employees participate in decision making. Sometimes this can be hard because sometimes if employees have a chip on the shoulder, then that can be problematic, you know, and they can throw a kink in a cog in the wheel, if you will, and you don't want that. That's why I always encourage, you know, when you're trying to implement a thing new, put together a task force that is going to allow you to maximize your journey. Otherwise, bringing everyone together in a matter where people are naysayers, a big problem. Even in church, when I advise them, this is what happens all the time, you know, even in church context, where we have the elderly group and then we have the youth. The youth have so much they want to do, but it's the older members of the congregation, they have the purse strings. They know how much money they have, whether to invest in this or not. So it's a negotiating factor where there must be some talented youth that can talk to the elders. And we call that adulting. To do adulting requires a certain set of skills, but there are those who are able to do that. And then there are some adults who are very open to new ideas. And then that's, they can pretty much navigate and negotiate with their colleagues. Because it's harder for the young person to go into the den of the elders and say, I need for these things to happen. But if the young person can convince 2 or 3 of these elders that are very much about young people, then let those 1 or 2 elders be the ones that convinces the rest of the elders in the church. The type of organization impacts the manager role. Public health organizations, private health organizations, they're very different. Not-for-profit organization, very different. NGO, different. Public sector, civil, crown. So what would you say are mostly operating in Nagaland? Can anyone tell me? What is the most common? Come on, students, don't be afraid. You can do this. What types of organizations are in Nagaland?
Private, not-for-profit, NGO,
Private?
public sector,
Yeah, you have public, private, okay. NGO,
not-for-profit.
not-for-profit, all of it, no? Except for Crown,
Yeah.
unless you have a prince or a princess somewhere. But you don't have publicly held organizations like corporate industry. Yeah. But all of these are operating, huh? Civil you have, like the government jobs. Managing is far more complicated today than it ever was. Managers must deal with multicultural challenges, technological challenges, and the demand for more accountability from customers and clients. Okay? Managers everywhere are dealing with corporate elite scandals. Oh, isn't that true? But when our government changes too, the same thing, no? Oh, we've voted for this person and he's been very corrupt and not giving us the kind of help that we can get. In our political realm, it happens all the time. Only certain kinds of people, business people, are able to get special interest money from this government with government contracts, right? So importance of customers to the manager's job. You need customers. Without them, most organizations would cease to exist. So you're always monitoring your customers. I don't know how Tetso goes about knowing who its customers are, but I'm sure you get feedback from parents, feedback from students, feedback from the other schools. One great feedback is from Nagaland University about the ranking of the department is pretty high in certain areas, not English. So those are good measures to have because you can write about those things. The Moran Express will write about it, and then as a result, you get greater recognition and presence in other ways. I'm also assuming that you have teams that go into communities to talk about Tetso. Huh? You go and share about it, and you have to toot your horn as best you can. But when they hear about you, then you set out the table and you just sign them on, because that's the best way to do it. In terms of customers, then your product has to be good. So, number one, I've noticed that Tetso's fee is very, very good compared to other institutions. I'm thinking, how can they function with the fees being so low? But that's part of the equation, isn't it? To make it affordable, so that you have studied the feasibility of the type of students that will be coming to your institution, so you have to keep that at that level, right? So another thing about Tetso is that I see that your print materials are always top of the line. You spend a lot of your money in print, and in a very fine way, because that's a product that's going to be in somebody's hand, and then they have to make a decision. So when you look at, I took Tetso stuff to America, and they said, "This from Nagaland?" I said, "Absolutely." They are doing so good. I was very proud of you, and because they saw this and said, "Oh wow, look at this, colorful, in digital form, very crisp, very clear." And man, if you were closer to America, you'll draw a lot of students to your campus. So all I'm saying is that you're doing things right for marketing, no? Because your customers matter to you. Social media, importance of innovation to the manager's job. Nothing is more risky than not innovating. So I hope you pay attention to that. Innovation efforts can be found in all types of organization, and it is critical throughout all levels and parts of an organization. So innovation is something that you're always adapting to because new things are emerging all the time. Adaptability. An adaptable organization creates a set of skills, processes, and a culture that enables to continuously look for new problems and offers solutions before the clients even realize this has, they have the need. So that's why in education field, it's very important to read what nationally the educational policy makers are making, because you know that that's coming down the pike. And so you want to get ahead of the game. And like I said earlier, just certificate alone is not acceptable. Now you have to have a degree to be able to teach. So they're giving until 2025 for you to have that kind of a degree. And if you don't, then organization will not hire you. To know that in advance, you can use that as a marketing tool. If you don't have education, you better get on it because your time is running out, kind of a thing. Okay, the universals of management then. The reality of work, the self-employment part of it, is why you study management. And I think if you learn management principles, then you can go into any venue and have the ability to run these things, okay? And it doesn't matter if you're in the government sector, in the corporate sector. Once you learn management skills, then wow, your equity is so great that you can be applied. So as literature students, it's okay to aspire to earn your MBA after your literature. If you do your MA and if you want to be an entrepreneur, you have to have some kind of an MBA background. And that way you can really do well. A lot of the people who have come through bachelors other than business administration generally end up in MBA because they have to earn money. That's where MBA is one of the most marketable degrees ever in any country bar none. That's why people tend to seek out MBA.
With respect to Nagaland, how do you see we stand in terms of management in the different organizations you work with, or that
Yeah, I don't think Nagaland has been fully infused with corporate culture, even though there are elements there. There are still traditional forms that are operating. So when you look at the leadership theories, you will see that certain leadership culture exists here. As long as the leadership culture exists here, then the leadership culture that requires this organizational synergy will not happen. Because for certain leadership styles, corporate industry is very conducive for that to be, cultivated. So if you think about it, and you think about industry around here, you have the sugarcane company here. That's one organization. But then, many things are small industries, small businesses, not corporate. There are no banking systems here as large where there's corporate industry happening like that. We have to go away to Madras or Bangalore or Calcutta or things like that. So I think we lack that kind of cross-cultural, cross-pollination in terms of our management style. So when you go into the government too, many of the government officials either have been educated and therefore they are in some ways subject matter experts. They are not organizational managers. So they can bring their PhDs or they can bring their education into the governmental sector, but they have very little management skills. So what happens there is that they work either by coercion, by referent power leadership kind of a thing, and they have their own chamchas now that's helping them out, and they are as good as how well these chamchas are able to function. So they don't have to do too much because this is being done for them by this group of people. So as long as these cultures exist, I think the idea of corporate management will be, slow in its growth. But you have an opportunity here, at TETSO. Your institution has the potential of really cultivating a corporate culture that could be vicariously learned not just by the students or by the staff that enter here and move on to another location in the future. So I think there is some limitation.
Sir, and how do we inculcate the corporate values that we have been discussing so far?
Yes.
Right. How to inculcate those values in our faculties?
Yes. So yes, I think departmentally you have to identify what your goals are and mission is. And I think once you clarify your goals and missions, and as you are mapping down your objectives and what personnel it would take and what skill sets it would take, then you are having this conversation. Can this be pulled out by a person who has this kind of an expertise but lack organizational skills? And at that point, I think that kind of open discussion should be had. I know that sometimes having that kind of a discussion would almost raise the question of, oh, you don't think that I am competent enough kind of thinking, no? But I think if you can rephrase it in a way that your expertise and your experience matter, but equally we need the organization of these things in such a way that we can move forward together. And I think we are effective, but we can be more effective if we added these things. And so if it's not an oppositional framing, then I think it could be a win-win situation. So it's all in how we frame things that can be either, even a bitter medicine, when you sugarcoat it, it's very easy to pop it in, no? So that's a principle, is how can we creatively market this among ourselves internally. So another thing to do is that let departmentally, your team do a project together that is really out of the box, but let it be a successful little project. Don't take a large thing, but a smaller thing. Let it be a successful little project, and then let that project then speak for itself to even encourage the HOD or staff members to celebrate. Because, and what could these projects be? It could be, you're in the organization side of things, right? If you took a group of students to, let's say, an industry like Nagaland industrial development, kind of a setting, and observe what they're doing and do a research together and critique it to say, they are doing this well, and here are the reasons why. But they could be so much better if they did this and this and this. You bring that information back and you sit down and reflect, with your team. That could be another simulated experience that could be done. Now we have what we call regional campuses. Regional campuses, because not all students could come to this centralized location. They had to open up regional campuses, let's say in Putzero, in Perrin, in other places. Now they became an animal, because are they going to function departmentally, or are they going to function as a site campus? As a site campus, then they are afforded all of the departments, but they still have to come to this dean. The English students have to come to the English department dean to be able to, deploy teachers there, deploy staff there. So these kinds of shifts are happening, and I know that control and management becomes a challenge. So in terms of change of that sort, I can see that an organization that is more flexible will have the most dynamic form of change and innovation. But organizations that are traditional, that are inflexible, and are low in dynamism will have very difficult change that could happen. So when you see it that way, then where do you position TETSO in all of that? I position TETSO more away from traditional, closer to the more the new methods. But what you're saying to me is that internally we are still trying to inculcate and nurture change from within. And I think that change from within will come about as the body grows and as you're bringing in new people that are flexible. into the process. And this is not about flexible people against inflexible people only, but it's about the guardians of the galaxy versus the mavericks who have to marry together. No, no, but this is true. This is very true. And and then when they work together, then you don't want it to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You don't want to be that. You want to be 2 steps forward, 1 step back, which is a good way to manage, because growth is happening. But if you do not grow in increments, in steps and phases, then in the end it will atrophy. So in organization, you have life cycle. You are born in the birthing phase, then you grow, and then you plateau. All organizations do that, right? And when you plateau, if you don't trajectorize yourself to rebirth again, growth will not happen. When you do appropriate rebirthing again, you again grow and grow and grow, and you hit another plateau. And then if you do not trajectorize yourself, then you will decline. That is the life of every organization. And then if you then want to make changes, then you relaunch again, like that. So in the life cycle of an institution, you will have multiple births that are happening as you go. And I think if the deans as well as the leadership perceives that and goes about it collaboratively, then I have no doubt in my mind that you'll be very successful. If in your field of study, what are the placement opportunities that you have come across in Nagaland, let's say? What can an MA with English do? What kind of job do you do? Have you guys given any thought to that? Pardon me? In the newspaper culture. Okay. So that's one aspect of what. In what's it again? In what way? Okay, publishing your own things, no? Okay. In corporate. About what?
About trainers.
Trainers? Oh. Yeah. Anybody interested as trainers in the corporate sector? Because in most corporate sectors, they have these international people who come who don't speak the language. So you're having to teach them basic conversational business English. And in doing that, they either get greater recognition by their managers because they have developed significantly, and therefore they have salary implications for those things. So in the corporate industry, you can be a trainer. Also, as like you said, in the business of newspapers, or you can write storybooks for children, which is huge. Storybooks for children are simple, but if you do phonemes and phonemic awareness books that are, down to the simplest units, those are very highly desired by reading arts professionals. And it could be published. Illustration work also can be done along that. You're nodding your head. Is that what you want to do? You don't know that yet. Yeah. So English literature can go down that path. I know that don't limit yourself to publishers in India only. There are publishers throughout the world, and they're always looking for international offering and contribution because they have a unique set of filters through which they're writing. And in the world of multicultural education, they're looking for little storybooks for little children, where you can teach character, issues, when you can address moral issues, when you can address tribal issues, you can address, daily living issues. So recently, Chinese schools came to me and said, "Can you send us 8 teachers?" And I said, "Where would that come with the teachers?" Well, they said, "Here are the parameters." You know what they were paying? They will pay for your airline ticket completely. They will give you housing for free. They will give you health insurance for free, and they will pay you $30,000 a year. 30,000 is what? 7 3s are about 21 lakhs a year. That's in demand. So as an English major, consider TESOL. TESOL can be done in a master's level. You can do it online, or it's for 2 years also. So with your MA, you already have English background. Get certified in the form of TESOL. You might not have to do a whole lot more because it will take some of the credits into the TESOL. Then you are fast track. I have lots of students that I send to China to teach English, and they have appointments for 1 year, or 2 years, or 5 years. So it's something to think about. And you'll be teaching in an English environment because these international schools are all English speaking. So from my town, there were 2 Koreans. They were musicians. Now they are department heads in the Chinese Institute. But from the institution, I had to send other musicians, but also English teachers as well.